Welcome to Regent Park TV. Today we bring you coverage of the recent public deputations at the Budget Subcommittee at City Hall, held on January 21st and 22nd, 2025, to gather feedback on the 2025 capital and operating budgets. Held both in person at City Hall and through video conference, these sessions provided an essential platform for residents across Toronto to share their perspectives on how the city should allocate its resources for the year ahead. Among the most compelling testimonies were those from Regent Park residents, who highlighted the challenges facing their neighborhood. Speakers emphasized the need for increased investment in affordable housing, community programs, and youth initiatives, particularly as the area continues to navigate issues of gentrification and economic disparity. These deputations underscore the importance of public participation in shaping a budget that reflects the priorities of all Torontonians. They serve as a reminder of the city's responsibility to address systemic inequities and support neighborhoods like Regent Park, where many rely on social programs and public services. Now, let's explore the key voices and powerful messages shared during these impactful sessions. This is Gabriel Meissner, and you're watching rptv News.
Thank you, councillors, for allowing me to speak this time slot in the morning. I want to acknowledge all the deputies that have spoken about the Toronto Police Services budget. It's true that we're living in difficult economic times, and that requires a pause and a second sober opinion by the mayor of the city of Toronto before approves the new recruits that are going to be hired in the coming years for the Toronto Police Services. You know that there is a collective agreement that we don't know the outcome of that probably they may require the city to pay them another 10 or 11% comparable to what the OPP gained in 2024 and the collective agreement. So the current request, it doesn't really is realistic. There will be more requests if we approve it, but at the same time, you have to understand that Toronto residents want is housing. Their housing needs is important. And Wally have explained to you guys about the merits of the social development plan in Regent Park. And I just want to add one thing. We have staff like you have in City Hall, and unfortunately we are having a struggle how to provide them with a paycheck so that they can support themselves and their families. So my heart goes to them. Also for the good folks of the Regent Park TV. They're doing an amazing, incredible job in the community, and I wish in the bottom of my heart that they can have a better salaries. And so I also want to say that I'm the 9% of residents who MLS said things we don't need to have coverage between the hours of 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. I spoke at the last TC Toronto Police Services Board meeting about the merits of incorporating new technologies to deal with sounds and noises during the night. I want to thank Chris Moyes for making a request to the MLSE to increase the number of staffing. When I went to the Police Services Board during the budget consultations, I told them about the benefits of having a Toronto Cat Watch, a Toronto Robocop. This little fellow right here can save a lot of money for the city of Toronto. This little fellow can patrol our parking lots, the malls, and do a job that currently is done by 3 or 4 officers. You know what? Maybe these officers can transfer to the MLSE and do the job that is currently not being done during the hours of 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. We need to, it's a city of 24 hours, and we really require to have the presence of MLSE officers to deal with residential noise complaints. I am one of them. Currently, I'm not able to sleep at night. I'm here not feeling rested, but anyway, that is my message to you guys. I appreciate what Mayor Olivia Chavez is doing to increase the food programs for our children. This is fantastic news. I think it's a good way to have traffic wardens more in the city to be deployed. That will reduce also the use of more police officers on the street. So all the investments that the city is proposing for the next year is wonderful in terms of the climate change. But right now, in the geopolitical world crisis that we're facing, I had to ask to pause again about the request of the TPS board to increase their numbers and their budget. At this time, it will be appropriate if they only allow them to have a minimum increase that will satisfy the police union and the police service in view of the current circumstances that we are facing. Perhaps a conservative government may be elected in Ottawa, and that may have big effects in our request for federal funding. Planning and Housing is debating on Thursday the phases 4 and 5. There is an application for the CMH to provide extra funding.
Miguel, I'm going to have to ask you to stop.
Yes,
there.
and I thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name again is Waleed Kogali Ali, and I'm here on behalf of the Regent Park Neighborhood Association to advocate for increased funding for the Regent Park Social Development Plan. I'm calling on the City of Toronto to commit to $1 million annually for the next 5 years. So this is from 2026 to 2030. So that's $5 million. Additionally, I urge the creation of a new budget line item within the community and social services category to support social development plans citywide. So why the increased funding is essential? As we all know, budgets reflect our political priorities. As a city, we must invest in communities to address the root causes of poverty, inequity, and violence, not incarceration. Consider this. The Toronto Police Services budget, specifically the Toronto Police Services Board, has requested $46 million in additional funding. That amount alone could fund social development plans across all 158 City of Toronto neighborhoods at approximately $292,000 per neighborhood annually. This will address critical needs in housing, food insecurity, employment, and youth programs, tackling issues at their root causes rather than reacting to symptoms. The success of the Regent Park Social Development Plan demonstrates the impact of such community investments. With $2.5 million invested from 2019 to 2024, Regent Park achieved a historic milestone of zero gun-related deaths in 2023. This is not just a statistic, it's a testament to the power of investing in people and their futures. So what's the impact of the Regent Park Social Development Plan, you might wonder? Well, over the past 5 years, the Regent Park Social Development Plan has delivered measurable benefits. For example, when it comes to safety, the Regent Park Safety Network organized community buddy walks and safety audits, fostering trust and shared sense of responsibility. Youth programs empowered young leaders, helping build safer, more cohesive community. On the employment and economic development front, the Workforce Integrator Program supported 80 residents, while entrepreneurial initiatives like the Night Market and Cafe Pop-Up generated over $11,500 in sales, fostering financial independence. Community building, events like Sunday in the Park and food distribution initiatives have engaged thousands of residents, fostering belonging and inclusion. Communications. Platforms like Regent Park TV and the Hello Neighbor app have connected residents and increased civic participation. So let's talk about bridging the gap. Despite these achievements, the gap between community needs and available resources is growing. In 2024, funding requests from the Regent Park community totaled over $4 million, but only $500,000 was allocated. This disparity underscores the urgency for consistent and increased funding. So we're calling for equitable prioritization, allocating $1 million annually to the Regent Park Social Development Plan and the $5 million for the 2026 to 2030 period is not just an investment in Regent Park, it's an investment in safety, opportunity, and dignity. Creating a dedicated budget item for social development plans citywide ensures that all 158 neighborhoods have equitable access to resources to build safer, healthier, and more prosperous communities. The proposed $46 million increase for police services could be transformational if redirected to community-based initiatives like the Regent Park Social Development Plan. Programs like this reduce the need for reactive enforcement by addressing systemic inequities and the root causes of poverty and violence. In conclusion, I urge you to prioritize investments in communities over incarceration. By increasing funding for the Regent Park Social Development Plan and expanding support to other neighborhoods, the City of Toronto can address the root causes of inequity and ensure a brighter, safer future for all its residents. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
My name is Joanne Warner, born in St. Jamestown, raised in Regent Park, and I'm still in Regent Park. Obama has a quote, and he says, social change starts with a story. So I'm going to share a little bit about my family's story and how we're still all alive today living in Regent Park. My father is from Antigua, or Columbus actually named Antigua, Antigua. The Warners were slaves in Antigua. Sir Thomas Warner and Edward Palmer colonized Antigua, hence the name Warner. My father came to Canada, particularly London, Ontario, in 1967. His brother, who was a police officer in Antigua, sponsored him. When my father worked at a cookie factory in London, Ontario, the people that he worked with said, if you want to see people like you, you got to go to Toronto, Black people. So my father, the next day, with $100 in his pocket, my father came to Toronto, ended up in a shelter, next day got housed, the next day got a job with the City of Toronto, cleaning the streets of Regent Park and Cabbagetown. And that is how we ended up in Regent Park and Cabbagetown. The two items that I want to talk about today, one, a call to action on tackling gun violence through early intervention, and the second is a request to reinstate the TTC stop at Sackville and Dundas for not only senior accessibility, but for our youth who use the recreation center, the Regent Park Community Center, for our Indigenous women who use the Toronto Birthing Center, and for our seniors who live right at the stop at Sackville and Dundas. A little bit about myself. Like I said, born in St. Jamestown, raised in Regent Park. My family was probably in St. Jamestown the same time Olivia Chow's family was in St. Jamestown. And I'm actually an Ontario Works worker. I work for Tess, but I'm gonna leave that hat off for now because we're going through bargaining. I'm gonna respect the process. But I have seen a lot of violence, and I'm gonna share, she's not here today, but I would not be sitting here today if it were not for the GOAT, the greatest of all time politician, Miss Pam McConnell. When I was in grade 3 at Spruce Court School, I was skipping math class, so I can't talk about financials here today. I will leave money out of the equation here. My friend and I were running to the cemetery where Jack Layton is buried. My friend got hit by a car. Piece of her forehead got cut out onto the floor. It was traumatizing. The first responder on the scene was a white woman that I didn't even know at the time, but she was always behind a gate, her co-op. The first responder was Pam McConnell. And she said to me, a little Black girl in grade 3, if you want to succeed, you got to stay in school. And I was skipping math class. And so I stayed in school. I saw Pam McConnell years later, and I went to school with her daughter, Heather Ann McConnell. We're still friends today. I saw Pam McConnell at Paintbox Bistro. There was a party there, and I said, Pam, I took your advice. I stayed in school. Not only that, I'm actually working for the government right now, helping people who are on Ontario Works, just like our family was. So what I want to talk about quickly, and I know I have less than a minute, is tackling gun violence through early intervention. Gun violence in the city of Toronto remains a never-ending cycle, claiming lives and leaving communities in fear and devastating communities like Regent Park, but not only Regent Park, other communities as well. If we want to truly tackle this crisis, we must transform the way we approach it. And change starts in the home, and intervention must begin earlier than ever before. Gun violence often takes a root in childhood, and it begins in the home. The solution that we've relied on for years have failed to address the root causes, and the strategies of the past will just not work in 2025. Some of the action plans that we need to adopt is we need to target elementary age children and their families. We've got to look at a holistic approach. The old way of doing things has not worked. We've got to involve the police, TDSB, people like myself, and the people who are victims of gun violence. It takes a village. Like, I would not be here if it was not for that village, if it wasn't for my teachers who did the intervention, where I ended up at training at UFT, and then I ended up going to Hollywood, and then my brothers who were on a little bit of a bad path are now okay. We're all homeowners today. I purchased a home in Regent Park. My brothers have purchased outside of Regent Park, and I know my time is up, but just to be...
You get 20 extra seconds for raising the goat.
Oh, the greatest of all time. Rest in peace, Pam McConnell. We gotta just do things differently. We gotta work together. I had my issues with the police too, but we've got some great neighborhood officers that have really done some great work. But if we start early and get to the kids in their homes, we wouldn't need all of the police. And then the last thing, I'm sorry that I'm gone over time, we gotta reinstate that stop at Sackville and Dundas, and I don't know why it was removed in the first place.
Yes,
Thank
I
you for
wrote
your
that
time.
down. I wrote that down. We'll look into it. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
So I'm Michael Rosenberg. I've been involved in these budget issues for quite a while, mostly because of concerns about technology. So I'm hoping that, I mean, I have seen that there's a lot more talk about priorities now than there were a few years ago. But it seems like the priorities discussion mostly happens with regards to new spending. With regards to the existing budget, there still seems to be a let's not really try to prioritize or shift from one thing to another. But I think it is a good idea to shift away from technology. So there are a few areas in the budget where people are talking about shifting existing spending. And if you do that, you get more money for the things you want to spend on. So you're not just reliant on how much new taxes you have, and then you can be very careful about prioritizing that. But if you also prioritize within your existing spending, you can shift some money, and then you have double the amount of money to spend on the things you want to, because you're getting it both from new revenue and from shifting. So I do think that the existing budgets should be looked at more carefully as you look at new spending. So to the specific point of technology, technology is not always even able to deliver at a cost-effective rate. It is a huge area of cost. So you shouldn't just think of it as, oh, this is going to work and it won't cost us anything. I mean, even a few years ago, and I haven't looked at very recent figures, but even a few years ago, the combined operating and capital for technology was over $250 million. So it's very reasonable, just even on general principles, to ask, do you actually need to spend so much there? Because even like 20% of that could really help with the budgets you do want to increase, whatever it is, transit and housing. I do also have a lot of ideas within those budgets, like transit and housing, about how you could shift from one thing to another. So shifting has a lot of benefits. But specifically, when it comes to technology, we really do have to reduce our expectations of benefits from technology. And during one of the advisory committees, I was able to get them to talk about harms as well as benefits. So we'll see if anybody actually starts looking at harms, but at least they agreed that there was such a thing. But to emphasize, there are definitely harms from technology. And when you hear more and more about artificial intelligence, you should understand that that's a real thing. Like, even from the early days of computers, like the people who invented like major parts of the computers that we use today, like Alan Turing or John von Neumann or Marvin Minsky, they all thought that like we would end up where we are today, that this was not just a glorified typewriter, that it was going to like become a thinking machine. And so I think you should take that much more seriously, and you hear about it more today because it has actually started to reach that point where it's starting to do some of those things. And what you're seeing today is still only the beginning. So please recognize that we will all be much better off and avoid these harms, which are very real, of technology taking over. We will be much better off if we find more ways to do things with less technology. So it's not just, shift money around because you want money in one place rather than another. You should also look at, is everything the city's doing now actually beneficial? Or are there some things we'd be better off with less of, regardless of the cost? And we're actually like,
I need your wrap up.
you're doing some harm by spending in certain areas. And I think technology should be looked at in that way. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I have been a supervised consumption site worker without ever having worked in a supervised consumption site. For 3 years, before the first permanent supervised consumption site opened in Toronto, I responded to overdoses, usually 1, sometimes 2 a week, at the Meeting Place, a daytime drop-in center located at Queen and Bathurst. People felt safe there. They were always welcome, and the staff treated them with respect. They used drugs there because there was no other space, no supervised consumption site for them to use. This included people living in shelters, people sleeping rough, and people living in precarious and low-income housing. This is important because daytime drop-ins are the only social service that captures all 3 demographics. We're a hub that catches priority groups who are disproportionately impacted by the toxic drug crisis. I remember asking Chris, a really brilliant young man, why he chose to use drugs at the Meeting Place. And he said it was because he knew that someone would walk by in case anything ever went wrong, and that the staff knew how to respond and with empathy, all of which is true. But responding to overdoses was not my dedicated task. I did not have the ability to closely monitor everyone using drugs in the drop-in space. We had 200 people a day coming in through our doors seeking food, clothing, and support with housing and healthcare. We were a 2-floor center with multiple rooms, and there was a lot of ground to cover. It usually took me 10 to 15 minutes to complete my rounds, with multiple people asking me for support all along the way. I often did not find people in time. Luckily, not to die, and we are so lucky that no one ever died in our space, but to prevent critical injury to their organs, including to their brains, through oxygen deprivation. I didn't always catch people before they had vomited while unconscious. And I remember scraping the vomit out of the nose of a young woman just to be able to get the nozzle of naloxone up into it. I didn't always catch people before they were blue in the face and barely breathing or even not breathing at all. And I remember performing CPR on my peer worker, Kyle, and the feeling of snapping his ribcage. while pressing the floating bones of his chest directly down onto his organs. It is the worst feeling that I have ever experienced in my life. And he lived. I'm so lucky that he lived. But I could not look him in the eye for months afterward because I was traumatized by what I had to do to him. I tell you these stories because I know that when the provincial government shuts down supervised consumption sites, and they will shut down in 70 days, daytime drop-ins will once again be your de facto supervised consumption sites because people know someone will always be nearby, and because they know we're both well-trained and well-practiced in how to respond. They trust us, but we are very inadequately resourced to handle what lies ahead. The city gave daytime drop-ins their first funding increase in a decade last year, and I really want to thank you for that. I asked for $1 million and it was built into the budget, but our operating budget, which only funds 22 of the city's 55 daytime drop-in centers, is still just $5.9 million. The staff-prepared budget currently builds an increase of $400,000, but it's not going to be enough. That's salaries of perhaps 6 or 7 workers at best. And I'm asking that you consider increasing the funding for daytime drop-ins to at least $3 million, or by at least $3 million, in order to substantially increase the number of community harm reduction workers in daytime drop-in centers, people who can be more dedicated to ensuring that no one dies from an overdose in our spaces, and who can reduce the number of critical overdose-related injuries like brain damage. And this is an under-discussed consequence of an OD. As well, responding to overdoses is really, really traumatizing. I know because I am living it. I do not want to have to go back to doing this work, but I will because I don't have a choice. And for this reason, I also ask that the $568,000 for staff wellness and equity initiatives for staff in city-run shelters only be doubled, and that these initiatives be extended to staff in daytime drop-ins, as well as to city-funded shelter staff and to outreach workers. Drop-ins need more harm reduction workers. This is urgent because it's coming. We will be your first responders to overdose. And in doing that work, drop-in workers, we will need more care for ourselves, clearly, but also to ensure staff retention and sustainable services for our communities during the very, very dark times that lie ahead. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank
Go
you
ahead.
very much for the opportunity. My name is Stephen Mensah. I'm the Executive Director of the Toronto Youth Cabinet, the City of Toronto's official youth advocacy body established by City Council in 1998 with the mandate of advocating on behalf of Toronto's young people. This year's budget is being signaled as a moment of change in the lives of Torontonians. Yet for Toronto's equity-deserving youth, this change remains out of reach and risks remaining out of reach unless meaningful action is taken in this budget. Many young people in our city continue to face significant challenges, including limited access to opportunities, persistently high unemployment, insufficient programming, and inadequate community support. Young people in Toronto should be able to live and grow in healthy and safe communities with a bounty of opportunity rather than overwhelming poverty and violence. Over the past few months and years, but more specifically a few months, the Toronto Youth Cabinet has actively engaged hundreds of youth from every corner of our city to contribute to the city's pre-budget and budget consultations. Young people filled out surveys, they came out and showed up and made their voices heard once again this budget season, through the TYC and directly to you. They did their part, they did what has been asked of them, and it's time for City Council to as well do theirs. I want to highlight some of the data that we got from the budget consultations. Over 85% of young people we engaged with referenced youth employment as a top priority for them and that they wanted to see increased investments for. Over 77% of them said transit affordability was crucial for them. Over 74% noted student housing and youth homelessness was a major priority, as well as over 70% of them noted community safety as a major issue. Public safety is a prerequisite for prosperity. We know that alarming statistics from Toronto Police data show that young people are behind nearly 2/3 of carjacking arrests. There remains an increase in youth involvement in violence, firearm arrests, and young people charged with violent crime. How do we expect to have a prosperous city when systemic neglect has led to our young people being disproportionately perpetrating community safety issues? These trends reflect systemic gaps and years of austerity disproportionately carried by young people, demanding immediate attention and investment. Toronto is at a breaking point, and there's no time to waste. Immediate action is critical. This budget process marks yet another opportunity to ensure that Toronto's young people, our equity-deserving youth, who have been starved of opportunities for too long, are finally prioritized. Our equity-deserving young people require access to meaningful and gainful employment. It's why the Toronto Cabinet and stakeholder partners from across the city have been calling for the creation of a youth employment program to provide an additional 10,000 jobs for young people. I think it's important to note that in the city's 10-year action plan for Toronto's economy, we have already agreed to achieve this target that TYC set by 2026, but this budget makes no meaningful strides to achieve such a goal and provide young people with the opportunities they deserve. We must make these investments now. We're also seeking investments in additional enhanced youth spaces to ensure that every neighborhood improvement area and priority neighborhood has one. The reality is the city can simply activate and renovate already existing community centers we own to ensure young people have access to a dedicated space in those centers that foster safety and belonging. This can be done in a cost-effective way. More acutely, we're seeking an increase in violence prevention funding, more specifically a $1.5 million investment in the Identify and Impact Grant Program to expand its reach and impact, addressing youth violence prevention and supporting over 55 grassroots youth-led initiatives. The city cannot claim to be investing in young people if it fails to invest in their ideas and initiatives. This budget, as is the case with all budgets, is a matter of priorities, and our current situation reinforces the need to invest in evidence-based solutions and upstream community-driven responses that have proven to be effective. My hope is that we can look back at this moment as a catalyst for change that led to substantial improvements to young people's socioeconomic conditions, that led to a safer, more equitable, more youth-friendly, and prosperous city. I urge you to ensure that this budget is remembered not for the missed opportunities, but as the moment Toronto took decisive action to amplify, empower, and uplift its young people. Thank you very much for listening.
Councillor Moise has a question of you.
Thank you. I know it's your last year as CEO, so again, thank you for your many years of service.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
So I know you've been advocating for a youth employment program, and I'm not quite sure if you're aware of the tens of millions of dollars that's attached to this standalone ask.
Yeah, so the youth employment program piece, I think one thing that we've been trying to reinforce is we do not expect nor desire for the city to cough the whole bill. We do believe the province and the federal government should pay up, which is why we and our stakeholders have met with Minister Parsa, Minister Marcia Ian, and folks to ensure that once this program ideally gets passed and committed by the city, that they can also make sure that they make the right investments to support it. So I think that's something that we really want to reinforce. We just want the city to serve as a facilitator of sorts to bring in these stakeholders, the private sector partners, nonprofits together who are willing and ready to hire young people, and then hopefully the provincial and federal governments who've signaled to us that they are willing to support, but the city can and should take such a lead. So I really did want to reinforce that part. We don't expect the city to cough up the whole bill.
Okay, because again, I've seen the dollar amount and it's quite significant. And also too, it's important to note that various city departments like TTC, for example, I see Councillor Myers is online, chair of the TTC. I know that TTC has a program for youth. Toronto Police has one. Many other city departments do have them. Yeah, many. Parks is the largest employer, yes, especially in summer months. So I see the line item when it comes to investments in youth. So it's important to note, I know there should be a question there, but do you acknowledge, do you acknowledge or recognize the tens of millions of dollars we invest in youth every year? And even in this budget, we've invested some funds in investment in youth.
Councillor Moise, I hate to do this,
I know.
but come on.
Are you,
Question mark on something.
Are you aware of the youth violence prevention programs that's in this budget?
Yeah, I know.
Among
under
others.
Under the city manager's item, I saw 5 million for YVP program. I'm not sure what that entails, but I saw 5 million for that. I know under STF&A, there's about 2-point-something million for a previously federally funded employment program. So I know those are the two investments I saw under YVP. But I think, Councillor, one thing that we've been reinforcing and will continue to is the need for bold, meaningful action. I think the reality is the issues young people are facing are not ones that require, I call it baby food investments, but rather real, tangible, sustainable, long-term, predictable funding to ensure that young people are able to get the supports that they deserve. And be it with this budget and previous budgets, the investments made are not as meaningful and significant compared to the downstream investments that we've made of police and first to ensure that young people have the supports they need to thrive and succeed. So I think that's where our part is we acknowledge every year the city is obviously going to make budget investments. I know we're investing about 443,000 in 3 additional youth hubs and whatnot. And those are all things we push for, we'll continue to push for, and we acknowledge, but we recognize that to truly put a dent in the rise in community safety issues and challenges young people are facing, it's going to require historic, bold investments as such that we've made on all these other downstream priorities.
Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors and fellow Torontonians. I'm Edna Norte, newcomer co-lead here at the Toronto Youth Cabinet, the City of Toronto's official youth advocacy body, and a current senior at William Lyon Mackenzie CI. I want to share the following headlines from articles published within the last week. Toronto metropolitan population hits 7 million thanks to immigration. Toronto Star. Ottawa slashes funding and programs for newcomer agencies amid cuts to Canada's immigration targets. Toronto Star. 1/3 of Ontario newcomers felt they felt safer in their home countries. CBC. These articles all showcase the reality of being a newcomer in Canada, and more importantly, right here in Toronto. It's getting no easier to be a newcomer, let alone a young newcomer in this city. Federal policies and overarching budget constraints complicate matters by prioritizing numbers over the quality of settlement experiences, quantity over quality. In my work at the TYC, my co-lead and I have seen firsthand the impact these budget cuts can have, ending phenomenal programming and leaving newcomer people without support and like-minded networks. It then falls on us, the City of Toronto, to make sure we are actively doing our part to ease this accumulated burden. This year's budget discussion offers a unique opportunity to end this and make a change once and for all. We must address the issues of newcomer youth, the keepers of Toronto, and prioritize investments in youth-specific programming and not only address the immediate needs, but pave direct pathways for long-term success. Rising youth homelessness, all-time high youth unemployment, and more are all barriers that are affecting youth. Firstly, youth unemployment is a critical issue. We can no longer have youth feeling helpless in their own city, facing anxiety at whether or not they will acquire meaningful and gainful employment to live comfortably within Toronto. Youth unemployment in the GTA has jumped from 13.2% in January 2024 to 19.8% in July. Racialized youth in particular faced 20.5% unemployment in 2022, which was far above the 15.7% for non-racialized youth, with Black youth disproportionately being impacted in 2024. Initiatives such as the Toronto Youth Cabinet's goal of creating 10,000 jobs for young people really highlight the importance of prioritizing youth employment in this year's budget. Programs will provide meaningful work opportunities, equip youth with essential skills, and reduce the alarming rates of youth unemployment. As a senior myself, it seems like life is right at the front door, and I'm working hard to try my best to secure a future. My parents and I were newcomers, and I will not allow their hard work and sacrifices to provide a life for me in Toronto go to waste. As a young person in the city, I want a good career, and I want my own home one day, much like everyone else. In addition, Toronto's shelter system is currently operating over capacity, turning many young people away. The city has made efforts to address this crisis, such as temporary and repurposed shelter spaces, but much more needs to be done to address this growing demand. In 2024, over 11,000 individuals, including a disproportionate amount of youth, young people, refugees, and more, relied on the city's shelter systems every night. Meanwhile, affordable housing developments have lagged behind their targets, with only 25% of the planned units being completed since 2020. The facts are all right here, and I urge this committee to act now with youth in mind. Increased funding for housing, youth employment programs, and education initiatives are not just investments in newcomer youth, but it's an investment in Toronto's future. By addressing these challenges head-on, we can build a city where every resident feels comfortable in this city, regardless of where they come from, and feels empowered to contribute to our collective success. But most of all, call Toronto home again. Thank you so much, and I am open to any questions that you may have for me.
Hi everyone, my name is Bev Herskovich. I am a woman with so-called invisible disabilities living in Ward 12, Toronto, St. Paul's. I am also an access animator for the GTA Disability Coalition, a group of organizations that aims to advance the accessibility, voices, and inclusion of disabled and deaf people across the GTA. It's no secret that we're in a housing crisis, but like with many other areas of society, people continue to overlook the fact that disabled Toronto residents disproportionately struggle to find affordable housing. Please, when the Mayor and City Council focuses on their housing investments in the 2025 budget, I implore you to consider the critical needs of this equity-deserving group. Disabled people need to be supported if you actually want to improve equitable access to housing for all. People with disabilities are 4 times more likely to experience homelessness, as underscored in research from the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And it's no wonder when all provincial disability payments across the country, including Ontario, keep recipients below the poverty line, even when you factor in the very meager amount that will be included in the upcoming Canada Disability Benefit from the federal government that they promised to provide. This disability housing crisis has many causes. Yes, poverty is definitely one of them. According to the advocacy group Disability Without Poverty, they recently shared that the poverty rate for people with disabilities is twice as high as for people without. But the right type of housing is also often not there for many people. Even in 2025, the year our province was supposed to become fully accessible. Yes, it's the Ontario government's responsibility to ensure that our human rights are met, which includes ensuring access to housing. But our city doesn't have to wait, and you can do better. I'm glad that in the proposed 2025 budget, the city wants to increase the amount it invests in affordable housing. Please allocate some of those funds towards creating more accessible, affordable housing specifically, as that is not a current priority in the current budget. In the fall of 2024, Council asked staff to update the city's affordable rental housing design guidelines to support the delivery of more accessible rental homes and include standards for implementing universal design. I urge you to please make sure that this initiative receives adequate funding. Our community desperately needs this. It's also economically advantageous for the city to invest in building the vast majority of housing uses with adequate universal design principles. Kate Chung, co-chair of the Accessible Housing Network, one of our coalition's members, recently published a letter in the Toronto Star discussing how the government might save millions of dollars by building accessible housing. It would save money by leading to fewer falls, ambulance calls, ER visits, hospitalizations, reduce caregiver burnout, and costs for long-term care facilities, and by improving quality of life in other ways that empower disabled people to participate in the community. Of course, we also need to support disabled people in the short term by addressing their urgent affordability needs. For example, the rent bank. I'm glad that the 2025 city budget is investing in expanding the program to support 300 more households. And I should note that disabled people disproportionately apply to this program due to disability poverty. But given how many people are struggling in the city, the current allocated amount is not enough. I urge you to please increase allocation beyond the proposed $8.2 million increase to address escalating need, perhaps shifting funding from the police budget to do so. People with disabilities in our community need and deserve your support. Please start with committing to ensure we can access homes that address our diverse needs. And because I have a little extra time, I'll also add that when it comes to coping with the climate crisis, I know that Council's been talking a lot about implementing a maximum temperature bylaw, and this is really important, especially for disabled people who are disproportionately affected by issues like air quality or increased heat, people who get sick. So please make sure you can throw as much money towards this as possible this year, and ideally before the summer. I know that might not be realistic, but whatever you can do to create temporary measures to help people need that too. Thank you for listening and for your important work.
My deputation could really be 60 seconds. There are people literally dying on the streets of Toronto, and we are pouring millions and millions of dollars into policing people. From the outrageous budget of the TPS to TTC fare cops to policing encampments. And as so many incredible community members, advocates, and unhoused people have been saying, and some of those people are in this room, there is a crisis, lack of affordable housing, dearth of safe emergency shelters, warming and drop-in centers. These are not natural disasters. These crises are a direct result of our city's policies and budget choices. Our city chooses to fund cops over people, and our city is continuing to fund a racist, violent, militarized police force, and now being asked to approve another outrageous TPS budget increase. Police do not keep us safe. And we've heard this for decades and decades from communities. Police cause harm. And today I keep in heart and mind the families and loved ones of Sammy Ateem, Regis Korchinski Paquette, Edmund Yu, Bobby Ramroop, and the many Black, Brown, Indigenous people, unhoused folks, sex workers, people in emotional crisis, poor people, and people using supervised consumption sites who have been targeted and continue to be targeted, brutalized, and criminalized by Toronto police. We also continue to see TPS using political policing to criminalize dissent and Palestine solidarity protests. For the past 15 months, we have witnessed police violently assaulting people, using illegal tactics and consistently trumping up charges. People have been brutally attacked, pinned to the ground, punched in the face, and have had their homes violently raided simply for speaking out against the Israeli genocide in Gaza and the ongoing occupation of apartheid in Palestine. My Jewish family and I have been participating in the Palestinian-led demonstrations, and we all walk past lines and lines of public order cops on horses, and I can assure you they are not there to keep us safe. Since October 2023, the TPS Hate Crimes Unit has led Project Resolute, which is dedicated to surveilling, criminalizing, and demonizing the Palestine Solidarity Movement. Every single trumped-up charge falls under hate crimes, including allegedly using washable paint in front of the U.S. consulate, protesting the U.S. involvement in Israel's genocide. As of October 2024, the cost of Project Resolute stood at $20 million. And as was noted, Project Resolute overspent $40 million last year. They are weaponizing anti-Semitism as yet another justification to increase the police budget. And let me say that exploiting anti-Semitism as a strategy to suppress condemnation of Israel's apartheid and genocidal regime is not new. It's been promoted by the Israeli government for decades and continues to be exploited by CIJA and B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith and CIJA claim to speak for all Jews, but as we know, we are not a monolith community. They also claim that our Jewish community is under attack and that we are all worried about going to school or work. The only fear I have experienced in the last 15 months is Zionist counter-protesters at rallies and cops at rallies who have assaulted me. Anti-Semitism is real and deeply concerning, but the weaponization and political exploitation of anti-Semitism is profoundly offensive as a Jew. Despite the police violence and repression, people of conscience will continue to be in the streets to demand justice and liberation for Palestine. As many communities have said, we say enough to racial profiling, surveillance, pathologizing, and criminalizing people. Enough to using our tax dollars to fund state violence. We need the city to fund our communities and care resources. The police do not keep us safe. They do harm. We keep us safe. Defund, disarm, dismantle, abolish.
Thank you. Amberly Rowe?
Greetings, my name is Amberly. I'm mainly here as a resident of the city. About a year or two ago, I was chatting with a community minister that I volunteer and work with at times, and she had asked if I would do a deputation at the city. I said I'd think about it in a future year. She runs a program called Bread and Bricks. That was where it came up, and so this is a future year, and I thought I would voice some things. At the time, I was volunteering in a advocacy center as part of a community food center, otherwise like a food bank. And regularly my day was spent on the phone waiting for nearly an hour to get in touch with central intake in order to get somebody a bed, ultimately just to be hearing there are no beds available. One of the more frustrating, and I had to just sort of bear the frustration, incidents was when a lady who was in her late 70s kept saying that she had money, and what she had was $1,600. And she was saying that she has the ability to rent a unit, and just trying to be as supportive as I could. And then eventually she comes to say, that she wants a shelter bed. I was very disheartened, and I was told, that I can't discourage her from wanting a shelter bed. As times moved forward, eventually we hit, the winter months, and she kept returning with various different people saying that she cannot sleep on my floor anymore, and is still waiting and is still trying to get her a bed. There were and are many residents, and it's hard to use the word residents, but all the same, people who were displaced by one means or another outside of the housing that they once held. And so some of my reason for attending today is that there's a program called EPIC. And what frustrates me greatly is that the title of the program tells you that you're aware that the program is addressing an issue in the city that is epic. You are very aware that we have a housing crisis. You're very aware that there's very few affordable housing units in the city. And you're very aware that with the climate that we're in, many landlords are highly incentivized to get their rent control tenant out and get somebody else in. Where I live personally, we had $10,000 offered to us to leave on multiple occasions, and now half of our building is tenanted by dorm students who pay internationally someplace outside of Canada to come, as they've kicked so many people effectively out. So now the hilarious thing is anytime one of them accidentally starts a fire, it's like a clown car where we just have so many people exiting the building because half of the people are split their unit and they're living in dorms, and they key themselves in and they key themselves out. If ever our electricity goes out, we have nice tenants in our building who will go downstairs and open the door for them. But all the same, I'm mainly here because I won't say his name, but there was one person who's in a shelter bed now, and he thanks me regularly, and it makes me sad. But anyhow, he accidentally, because I gave him my telephone number, called me once at Christmas, and I was very happy to hear from him. Today is a very, 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 very cold day. And there are many people in the city of Toronto doing things I wish they didn't have to try and keep themselves warm. And what he would be doing on a regular basis is trying to pee in a can to not set off a motion center to make people aware of where he was trying to settle himself for heat. So I'm saying that we have a program called EPIC, and it's supposed to be eviction prevention in the community, but it is not working. It is often prioritizing ways to get somebody into a shelter, but quite frankly, if you can keep them in their actual unit, it wouldn't be a need. So I'm so saddened by so many people telling me their story about they had this right, they had this right, they had the third right, and it's like you do not have rights because you do not have lawyers. And so you funnel yourself into the system, you do the best you can, and then you're on the street. And then Tina is the person who runs the community ministries, would want me to actually also state that you also have a program in place for people who are not quite being captured, or a program is needed for people who are not being captured, people who are invisibly homeless, who are staying on the floor, who are staying in someone's closet, who are finding some other non-housing place to try to get themselves through. And I'd like to ask better out of the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. I know that was hard.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on social media, and for more information, check out our website.